Last week, someone raised the question, it's a very good question. If in this practice we are asked to hold the suffering of the world, what does that mean in terms of equanimity? What's the relationship between these two things? They can seem incompatible. To absorb, to include, to take on so much suffering, and then somehow to hold yourself in a particular way that I think we imagine seems unperturbed. These two things seem to be in conflict. I wanted to try to address that today, just from my own perspective. I've been reading a little bit recently about different approaches to psychology. And it's interesting, from the very beginning of psychotherapy, there's this question of how does the therapist hold that role? What does that dynamic look like? What should it look like between the therapist and the client? And it's changed over time. Freud, as I understand it, at least in the beginning, would sit in the corners and in such a way that he was not in the line of sight of the client or the patient. That way he could talk, he could engage, but he hoped anyway, he wasn't a distraction. And that would allow the patient to kind of go off into their own mind without including Freud necessarily in that equation. And then, different schools of thought emerge, and some of them involve a kind of tremendous warmth toward the patient. Some of them suggest that actually the relationship should be quite confrontational, which the therapist is pushing, right? Almost on the attack, saying, what about this? What about this? And part of what I find so fascinating about this, when I read about these different approaches, is that they so closely mirror different approaches to, or different ways of holding the role of a spiritual teacher. We have all these models. We have the one who just gets out of the way. We have the one who holds the student maybe in Zen we would say the teacher is seeing the student as Buddha nature, even if the student can't see it themselves. Enveloping them in that kind of trust so that they have room to grow. Obviously in Zen as well, we have this model of the confrontational teacher, the one who is there to push. They all have a different utility, and they all speak to different temperaments and different outcomes. But the approach that I've been reading about that I really appreciate, that really resonates with me and my understanding of this practice, comes from a psychotherapist named Carl Rogers, who, in his explanation of what that dynamic should be like, really focused on something he called congruence. Now, congruence is defined, I'm not an expert, but I looked it up. It's defined a little bit differently according to context. So congruence, in one way, is treated as a kind of ideal for everyone. And in that case, congruence means that there's no gap between essentially the kind of person you want to be and the way that you act. which sounds really great indeed. Everyone wants to narrow that gap. So it's a really handy word for describing that state or for recognizing that gap. That sense that there's a distance between where I would like to be and how I'm actually manifesting in the world. But then this term takes on a more specific meaning in relationship specifically to the therapist, what the therapist is bringing to the room. And in that case, congruence, that you hear different words get thrown up like authenticity, but the best definition that I heard, the one that really struck me, said that congruence is the antithesis of defensiveness. The antithesis of defensiveness. What does that look like? Before we get into what it means to hold that ourselves, what does that just look like? To be with someone who is in no way defensive, who is in no way self-protective, regardless of what we offer. Regardless of what's going on. It's remarkable. I think that if you're someone who has ever really loved deeply as an adult in a way that had some maturity, you understand this. If you have had children, maybe you understand this. That there can be moments when the person you're with is not okay. Maybe because they're afraid, maybe because they're stressed out, maybe because they're angry, whatever it is. And you, because you feel a security in your relationship to that person, in terms of what you see your responsibility as, in terms of what you know you must offer, you are able to sit with that. You are able to absorb that anger or that fear, that stress. Without putting up any walls. You can be there for that person. We use that phrase a lot, to be there for someone, but deeply. To be truly available. I think we've experienced this from both sides, but it's also rare. It requires a kind of maturity, maybe even a kind of confidence in one's role in order to hold that congruence. So then what is equanimity? I know what I picture when I hear the word equanimity. And I'm guessing it's not that different from what you picture when you hear the word. Everything just rolls off. I'm perfectly calm. It's equanimous. It has it's level. There are no waves in this ocean. I can picture it, and yet if I ask myself honestly, have I ever experienced it? Truly. I'm not sure I can say yes. And I'm not sure I've ever witnessed it. Not in some perfect form. not that version of it. And I'll go further to say, I'm not sure I'm interested in it. We have these notions of equanimity, we have these notions of enlightenment, we have these notions of what it looks like to be a spiritual person. And very often, our idea of what it is to be spiritually realized looks an awful lot like a blank slate. It looks an awful lot like someone who cares perhaps in an absolute way, but maybe not in a relative way. Someone who, when they hear a really funny joke, maybe just grins a little bit and nods. And when they see something deeply sad, just has a serious face. That's how you play the character of someone who has this kind of equanimity. That's how you play the role. That's not very compelling. I think about the parts of myself, the experiences that I have that mean the most to me. The moments when I feel most alive, most human. And they're nothing like that. When I watch a movie or I read a novel and it makes me cry, then I feel authentic. And when I ask myself what I want for my children, I don't want them to be blank. I don't want them to be so even. I want them to be moved. I want them to be able to know profound joy and profound sadness without resistance to them. To have that feeling of being broken open. And to loosen the muscle that wants to fight back when it's happening. That's what I want for them. That's what I value in myself. So what might equanimity be in this practice if we let go of this idea, this kind of weird, cartoony idea of what it might look like? I think it looks like congruence. I think it looks like the antithesis of defensiveness. So in the face of all the suffering, it isn't that we are touched, it's that we are. It's that our hearts are broken completely. What makes it equanimity is that we don't fight that. It's that fight, not just with the thing, but in ourselves. The question of, can I take it? Can I handle this? Should I be pulling myself together? That's when equanimity is lost. That's when we're thrown off balance. How should I think about this? How should I feel about this? We step back from what's authentic. We step back from what's real. We step back from what is moving us, what is touching us, and we start to second guess our own response. oh, maybe I should feel this way. Maybe I should put on this kind of face. Now we're a million miles away. We've retreated into ourselves, into a debate within ourselves about what looks authentic and what feels authentic. Because we've lost touch with what is authentic. Can we learn? And here we're not talking about the role of therapist, and we're not talking about the role of a spiritual teacher. We're talking about the role of a bodhisattva. Can we, in that role, come to the world in all its complexity and all of its pain without anything to protect in ourselves? Without any resistance to being there? I'm going to say yes. And so with that in mind, I think the answer to the question is not that complicated. How do we hold the suffering of the world with equanimity? We say yes to the suffering of the world. We agree to it. We let our hearts be broken. And that's where I'll stop.